You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Sean Lay. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Sean Lay. Under apartheid, he defended black South Africans using the law, was himself locked up under the law, but eventually helped write the law for the new South Africa. Albie Sachs, former Justice of the Constitutional Court, says he's achieved soft vengeance against his former oppressors, even against those who blew up his car and nearly killed him. Over 20 years since the end of white minority rule, though, many feel a sense of disappointment. World's best constitution, he says proudly. Pity people can't eat it, comes the critics' tart response. With the president besieged by corruption allegations, how robust do his laws look now? Albie Sachs, welcome to Hard Talk. You defended black South Africans under apartheid laws. You were imprisoned under those laws yourself. You then helped write the most fundamental law of all, the Constitution for post-apartheid South Africa, and then sat on its constitutional court to enforce that Constitution. Is there enough respect, you think, for the law in South Africa today?
It's so fascinating to watch because the law is playing a central role in our country. And the more disrespect there is for it, the more respect there is for the way in which it's responding. And I've been off the Constitutional Court now for 6-7 years, so I'm not bragging about myself, it's my colleagues, another generation. I think they're doing extraordinary work, and their one weapon is the Constitution. But that's not just a document, a set of words. It grew out of our history, it grew out of our pain, it grew out of our eagerness to find a way, how can we live together in one country? We've been trying to kill each other. It grew out of our drawing on the best that the world had to offer in terms of governance, rights of people. And so it's a very progressive constitution in its terms, and we've got strong institutions to back it up. And one of the reflections that has come to me recently is you need three things. If any one of them is missing, you're in danger. You need a good constitution. I don't know how you guys in England have managed for a couple of 100 years without one, but you've managed. You need a good constitution. You need constitutionalism. That's something in the culture of the society, not just a document, a sense of right and wrong, fair, unfair ways of doing things. And you need institutions that can be invoked, that work. And what's been so striking in South Africa now, for all the allegations, the evidence, the leaks that have come out, very powerful condemnations of very, very high figures in our society, the institutions have remained firm. One of them, the public protector, created it's called Chapter 9 in the Constitution, Institutions for the Protection of Democracy. It includes the public protector, like the ombudsman, but much more powerful, much more powerful. It includes the Independent Electoral Commission. Kenya now is struggling so hard, partly because there's a lack of faith in the Electoral Commission. We had elections last year, wasn't a single complaint. And it includes Constitutional Court, it includes the Auditor General, a whole series of bodies protected by the Constitution.
Well, let's pick up on one of those. You mentioned the public protector, because the previous public protector had drawn up a report, you'll be aware of this, Thuli Madonsela, over a state of capture, she called it, into the relationship between the president and a business family, the Guptas. And she urged the president to appoint a commission of inquiry, but let the Chief Justice decide who chairs it. Whereupon the president's office, another institution of the state, another institution established by the Constitution, said, no, under Section 84 of the Constitution, appointing commissions of inquiry, this power can only be exercised by the president. Whereupon the new public protector says, no, there are numerous reasons for which to believe that the president is subject to a conflict of interest here, so he can't possibly appoint the chairman of this particular committee of a commission of inquiry because he would have a direct personal or financial interest in the outcome of the commission. Two institutions, one constitution. You were on the Constitutional Court, you helped write the Constitution. Who's right?
It's not for me to answer. That very
you must
issue
have an
now,
opinion.
The very issue now is being debated in the Constitutional Court. And on the one hand, the Constitution says the power to create commissions of inquiry belongs to the President. On the other hand, the recommendations of the Public Protector can be put into force. And she says, in this particular case, you will appoint the Commission of Inquiry. We're not saying that, but you won't choose the judge to head that. The Chief Justice will choose, and then you will have to. It's the kind of question you put to final year law students to grapple with, and it will be making law. So it's not for me to pronounce on that.
And you would argue there is no right answer to that, but somehow between them the institutions have to resolve this.
Well, I wouldn't say there's no right answer. I think there is a correct answer. Okay. I won't say what I think it is, that my colleagues, or those who would have been my colleagues if I'd still been on the bench, they'll decide that. What I can be sure of is they will give a very soundly reasoned answer. And I'm pretty confident that whatever the answer is, it will be accepted.
Right, and that's
by
the key
President,
thing, isn't it?
Whether it goes in his favour or against him, it will be accepted.
Do you think the Public Protector's powers need to be strengthened now, having seen it in operation over the last few years, and in a very high-profile and very highly political environment? I mean, it couldn't be more political than investigating the President, for goodness sake.
I think what the Public Protector needs is not so much more power, the power's there in the Constitution, but more resources.
Why do you think there have been a growing number of attacks on the Constitution? Because it does seem to have become more contested in the last couple of years than it was in those first decade and a half of post-apartheid South Africa.
Well, the challenges are coming from two... I haven't even got the extra arm to show how far apart they are. Yeah. Just imagine this arm.
Indeed.
Before
as
it was blown up by a bomb, as it was. On the one hand, the challenge, the judges are overreaching themselves. They're taking over government. That comes from supporters of the President today. And on the other hand, from young people, saying this Constitution is standing in the way of real transformation, of land redistribution in the country. It's blocking the way.
And you heard this at first hand, didn't you, when you delivered the Oliver Tambo lecture back in University of Western Cape, when some of the audience said to you, look, every generation has its mission, you had your political mission, ours is economic liberation.
And it's fantastic to hear that challenge. And I've spent a lot of my time now involved in what rather pompously is called intergenerational discourse. And it's terrific, because those young people see like to feel I've got some spirit and some stories to tell.
Oh boy,
and
yes.
I love the passion, the eagerness, the idealism, the often exquisite, beautiful use of language. And a country can only benefit when people are thinking, even if the thought sometimes is as cheeky and irreverent as my thought was at that age. It's stirring up the country.
But there's a harsh edge to this, isn't there? And it's the economic reality in which many South Africans are living. Many of those young people you've been talking to, their families have grown up with. That whatever the promise of a multiracial South Africa in which black South Africans, coloured South Africans took their place as equal citizens with white South Africans, the economic reality is an unemployment rate of 54% and among for young people, and an overall unemployment rate of 27% for everybody. Far too high. Intense, entrenched poverty. A sense that really South Africa is not the South Africa they were promised. Jonathan Jansen, Rector of University of the Free State, says when talking with his students, if Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela, the first president, gets any mention at all, it is as a sellout. The man who led South Africa into a soft transition that left white privilege undisturbed and black poverty undiminished. He's right, isn't he?
He's wrong. He's wrong. It's not wrong to say that's what people are saying, but what they're saying misses almost completely the reality of what was achieved. We had to destroy the system of apartheid to open the way to economic transformation.
But it hasn't happened.
If we tried everything at once, we would have had chaos, disaster, collapse. People would have said, black majority rule just leads to chaos. So we dismantled the institutions of apartheid, we integrated the armies, and we gave power to Parliament to bring about transformation. Now, if Parliament hasn't done enough, that's a very, very valid question. But don't blame Mandela, don't blame the Constitution.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer's lawyer who believes in the law as such, but we got so much into that Constitution, and you read it, its text, the language, it's for transformation, it's for change. The argument that I'm advancing, and many of us, use the Constitution. Don't trample on it. It's your biggest weapon to bring about the second liberation, which will be the economic liberation.
Right, on that second liberation then, do you back the argument that there should be an amendment to the Constitution? This has been advanced in particular by Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters, that would actually allow the state to appropriate land without compensation. Because his argument is very simple. We are told in our oath that we own the land, but we don't own the land. The land, the distribution of land wealth, ownership is really still concentrated in a very small number of hands, just as it was before apartheid was abolished.
He's absolutely right that the patterns of land ownership have changed very, very slightly. It's not as though nothing's been done. Something like 80,000 people who were dispossessed under apartheid of their land got their land back or got money back. And the programs for land reform remain to be implemented. So in that aspect is completely correct. It's possible to confiscate land, expropriate land at values well below market value if you apply the Constitution.
This is Section 25, yes?
Section 25, if the land is lying fallow, it's not being used, and people need it for housing, that's a factor, I believe, it hasn't been argued yet in court, could be taken into account. If the land was bought for a song, if the government has invested a lot in soft loans to the farmers, all of that can be taken into account. None of that's really been tried, so try that first. The problem with doing it without compensation is there's no disciplining at all. You can have state bureaucrats seizing the land, dishing it out to their friends. We don't want that.
You're worried about the Zimbabwe precedent?
I don't want to mention particular countries, but it's not restricted to one country. It's happened in many, many countries where people who fought bravely for freedom got freedom, but then used their position in the state to accumulate enormous tracts of land for themselves, for their family.
Of course, you know that those allegations are made against some in South Africa as well, but we'll park that thought. Who owned the land? Having a stake in one's own nation was an important part in the campaign for equal rights.
You know, we used to say, Mayabu, Africa, Africa, come back. And in a sense, it's come back in a kind of moral sense, a leadership sense. The people who are calling the shots politically, African, overwhelmingly black Africans. We hear the different languages being used in Parliament, in public debates and so on, but we haven't got Africa back in the sense of direct connection with means of production, with the soil, with the way people live. That has to be done, and it's a very, very valid claim that's being made.
During that long struggle, the first part of that struggle, because from the sound of it, you think some of these struggles continue, you spent several months in solitary confinement. Do you think you still bear the scars of that period inside? I
do. You never get over solitary confinement. It leaves a residue, repository of a deep, deep sadness. And yet, ironically, Sean, I can't explain it. When I was blown up and I survived, it blew away that misery.
So that was almost a catharsis of what had gone before?
It was like saying, okay, they tried to kill you, and I survived. You know, people say the definition of an optimist is the glass is half full. I was optimistic. They only blew off my arm. I survived. And that was 1988, and I still feel that today.
And so the period of solitary confinement was what, in the 1960s?
Yes.
1960s. And you spent how long in solitary?
Well, it was 168 days the first time, and then about 3 months the second time with some sleep deprivation thrown in.
And you talk about a terrible moment when you realised that they had actually beaten your body, not physically beaten you, but had kind of put you under such strain and stress that you started to talk. And you didn't talk about people who they could get, you talked about people who had gone or abroad or were past. Did you fear that if that process had continued much longer, you would have been so broken that you would have
I don't know. It's possible. I got through the first session completely. I didn't say a word, 168 days. The second time, it was a much rougher treatment and sleep deprivation. I think something in my food. I collapsed on the ground. They poured water on me. I kept my eyes open. And my choice was try and control my breakdown, because others had withstood it for 3, 4, 5 days, collapsed completely. And then, fortunately, the way these things happen, another person who'd undergone this in another cell, put in an application to court. I heard about it. I smuggled out a tiny little note about my own experience, and the court actually at that stage put a stop to the interrogation. So who knows? I mightn't be sitting here today if it hadn't been for that court application.
You talk then about what comrades who were dead, comrades who were abroad, people that you thought they couldn't get at, to give them something.
At that stage, I was doing that. They were preparing to come back to get me afterwards. I started off by saying I'm making this statement under duress and so on. They just elided it all from the actual document that they had. But afterwards, I discovered I'd complained to a magistrate. It's there on, we used to have these flimsies, 5 copies on like pink and green carbon copies, and there it is. For if anybody's interested.
Faint, but still preserved for all eternity.
Yes, that I actually complained at the time.
You mentioned a couple of times already the subsequent act, the attempt to murder you by the South African security services. What do you recall of that day?
It shaped me. And it's not only shaped me physically, it shaped my thinking. Because when I got a letter, I'm recovering in the London hospital, don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. Avenge me, we're going to cut off the arms, we're going to blind in one eye. Is that the country we want? If we get freedom, if we get democracy, if we get justice, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And since 1988, soft vengeance has been my theme. And getting the Constitution, helping to write the Constitution, sitting on the court that is upholding the Constitution is all part of my soft vengeance. And soft vengeance is much more powerful than hard vengeance. Hard vengeance is we're stronger, we're doing to them what they did to us. Soft vengeance is the triumph of the ideals.
All the pain you went through, all that period of recovery and convalescence, all, I guess, the fear that at some point that you may not have made it, you didn't feel any anger?
On the contrary, I felt joy that I'd survived, and it's for something. It validates all the pain, the hardship, the misery, the doubts. Yes, we're getting democracy in the country. Yes, we have a court that will stand up to the president, to parliament, to whoever, if necessary, in terms of the Constitution.
And yet you say that when you took your very young son, Oliver, to the scene, planning to tell him exactly what had happened to his papa, you couldn't quite bring yourself to tell him the full evil of the system that you had been fighting.
I could tell him about the bomb, the events. Something inside me just blocked me. I didn't want to tell him that his mum and his dad would have been breaking the law just by kissing each other, let alone conceiving him. I didn't want him to hear that from me.
Because his mum was black and you were white.
She's black, or would have been classified as black.
The older
I would have been classified as white. I didn't want him to carry that burden from his dad. He'll learn about it in history from others. He's already learning about it.
And for you, that is still the most revolting thing about the system, the inhumanity of that, as much as the violence, as much as the terrible things like, for example, the agents who tried to kill you.
Yes. It's the humanity of the conception that some people are worth more than other people. This is foundational, and it's that denial of basic human dignity, and that's been a huge achievement in South Africa. There's so much that's wrong now. It's not only corruption and unemployment, it's levels of violence. Racism in our society is still very, very strong. But we've got a country. We didn't have a country before South Africa. We've got a constitution, we've got institutions, and we've got people who speak their minds. Samora Machel used to say, leaders come and go, but the people never die. It's a very romantic notion, but I think it's a notion worth holding on to. The people never die.
I wonder if there's a bit of romance that perhaps has got in the way of the transition for South Africa, and that's that perfectly understandable sense of camaraderie, that sense of loyalty to comrades who fought in the struggle for so long, and to the ideal of the African National Congress, to the principle and the belief that you all swore to. Do you think perhaps some people have held on to that too long and perhaps been too willing to put, in a crude way, party before country?
No, the values you can never hold on too long. Never, never, never. And the values always had that critical self-reflection element to it. Oliver Tambo I'm speaking about a lot now. He was so open-minded, so eager to embrace new ideas, new ways of looking at things. But those core values of human dignity, of non-racism, later on non-sex, never changed. That shouldn't change. The loyalty is to the values.
You cannot have failed to see that in a succession of votes of no confidence against President Zuma, for all the allegations against him, the ANC MPs loyally trooped through the lobby supporting the president. And then the first ballot that is held on with the secret ballot, the first motion of no confidence, the most recent, suddenly perhaps 25, maybe as many as 30 ANC MPs vote against him. That's a revelation, isn't it, that actually this is a corrosive thing, this loyalty to party. And only when they're protected by the secret ballot do they vote with their conscience.
It's even more complicated than that, because the story was many more would have voted in favour, except they felt it wasn't for Parliament to change the president of the ANC. The ANC is having a conference in December. The ANC has got to do it itself.
That's fine, but if you're one of those people on the end of all of this, the ordinary people of South Africa, you can say, well, I can have this debate and we can talk about it, but nothing changes. And they hear, for example, all these allegations. The president, the public prosecutor, finds he's $24 million, I think, had been spent on sorting out his property for security. He's told to pay some of it back. He says, I'm not going to pay it back. Nothing changes. Nothing happens.
No. He was ordered to pay some of it back, and he paid it back. He paid it back.
Only once the court intervened.
Yes, but he did it because people were making a clamour. The court intervened, gave a ruling. His own counsel said, we acknowledge that he has to pay it back. That's not insignificant. In fact, I'd say it's hugely significant.
Would it be better for the country if there was a change of president sooner than the summer of 2019, in your view, as a citizen?
I'm not going to get drawn into that, simply because I don't think it's right as a former judge. The question I would love to offer my views on.
We would love you to do so.
I require, it's a kind of judicial prudence I won't answer.
Are you disappointed with South Africa as it is today? Is it that sense of the curate's egg, good in parts?
I think no. I'm much more affirmative than that. It's partly I lived in Mozambique after independence. It was fantastic. We were so excited. We were lifted up by the sense of the revolution, and it crashed. Bitter civil war. It was chaotic.
So are you saying at least South Africa isn't as bad as that?
We haven't had that. It's taken longer, and our institutions are holding. Our elections are meaningful.
So
we had
far.
a higher percentage poll for our municipal elections last year than America had for their president, and there wasn't a single complaint afterwards.
Let me ask you a question then that has nothing to do with individuals. Whoever she or he is who takes office after the summer of 2019, what should South Africa's next president aim to do differently from the previous three presidents?
I would hope whoever becomes president of the ANC, who isn't automatically the future president of South Africa, because people have a vote in general elections after that.
They do, but it has been the ANC candidate on every occasion thus far.
Give strong emphasis on restoring integrity of institutions, restoring the values of non-racism, in creating conditions for serious and deep-going economic transformation, but getting the buy-in from as many sources as possible, but with a strong initiative in that regard. And maybe cutting down on some of the bitterness, the sharpness, the toxic elements of our debates, whoever it might be.
Albie Sachs, thank you so much for being with us on Hard Talk. Thank you. Now, just a quick word about a really important and exciting week for one of our other BBC World Service podcasts. What have concrete, barcodes and the plough got in common? Well, they have all featured on 50 things that made the modern economy. And the series, which has been very popular, has now reached its 50th thing. You can hear about all 50 of the things by searching for 50 things that made the modern economy wherever you find your podcasts. But there is still one more episode to go. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unveiling of the 51st thing, as chosen and voted on by listeners. That's going to be available to download this coming Saturday.